This presentation will help you understand in-text citation and your works cited page. For essays formatted in MLA style, outside information such as direct quotes, summaries, and paraphrases are cited in the text. What does that mean? This example is for an author named in a parenthetical reference. We begin with a signal phrase, and then the direct quote, and then the in-text citation, or the parenthetical reference. The word Bollywood is sometimes considered an insult because it implies that Indian movies are merely a derivative of the American film industry. And you can see that the in-text citation includes the author's last name and the page number on which you found the quote. And look, notice that the period for the sentence comes outside the parenthetical citation. It seems weird. It seems like it should go after American film industry, but it doesn't. It goes outside the parenthetical citation. Here's another example for an author in a signal phrase. This is when you name the author in your text. So, in his discussion of Monty Python routines, Crystal notes that the group relished breaking the normal rules of language. Because the author appears in the signal phrase, you don't need to put the name in the in-text citation, just the page number on which the quote was found. So you include the author's last name in the signal phrase, and then just the page number in the in-text citation. And again, notice that the period comes after the parenthetical citation. It's really how we do it. Here's an example with 2 or 3 authors. Gortner, Hebron, and Nicholson maintain that opinion leaders influence other people in an organization because they are respected, not because they hold high positions. So you can see that the 3 authors' last names are right there in the signal phrase. And again, we have the page number in the parentheses. And yes, there is the period outside the parenthesis. So sometimes there isn't a single author or many authors who write the resources you might use. And that's when you figure out it could be an organization. Here's an example. Any study of social welfare involves a close analysis of the impacts, the benefits, and the costs of its policies. And it turns out the Social Research Corporation wrote that. And so you just use their name in there. And notice how there's no page number here. Sometimes you find information on the web and there's no page, it's just there. So you wouldn't include a page number unless you actually have a journal or a book or some kind of magazine that you're quoting from. And yep, there it is. This example is when you have an unknown author, but there isn't an organization or institution that you can include as the author. In that case, you would use the article title. And notice how it's in quotes when it's an article in a magazine or a journal. And in this case, we do have a page number, so we include that. Sometimes you may not have a page number if it's an article that's in an online resource. And in that case, you would just put the title. Yep. So here's another example with no page number, but we do know the author. In spring, the Oregon coast blooms with wildflowers, including trillium, lilies, bluebells, goldenrod, daisies, and many other species. We have Clapp as the author, and we always just use the last name in the parentheses. That's really important to remember. And then let's say we put the author in the signal phrase and we don't have a page number. In that case, it would look like this. On his website, Northwest Nature, naturalist Michael Clapp lists by color all the flowers that bloom on the Oregon coast, including trillium, lilies, bluebells, goldenrod, daisies, and many other species. And you can see I've got Michael Clapp's name right there in the signal phrase. And an important tip here is that The first time you refer to an author in a signal phrase, you want to use the first and last name, and you might mention that author's credentials. For example, it's important to know that Michael Clapp is a naturalist because he's sort of my expert on flowers. I'm trusting his knowledge. In the parenthetical sites, you would use the last name only, but when you first mention the author in a signal phrase, you use both first and last. And notice here that I am paraphrasing this information. This isn't a direct quote from the website. It's just, I just read a bunch of stuff and then came up with my own way of expressing it. But I didn't know this information before I went to that website, so I have to give somebody credit for it, and Michael Clapp is the guy. More and more frequently, people are finding that they get their sources from the internet, which can be great or it can be terrible. The important thing to remember is you have to include certain elements, and these are listed here. You need the author, the title, and some electronic publication information. If you have all of this stuff, you want to include all of it, but you're not necessarily going to have editors or versions or things like that. So you would include whatever you were able to locate. And then you include the date you accessed the information. And if you think that it might be difficult for whoever's reading your paper to find the information, you might include the URL, but don't include it by default. And the order that you see here is maintained in your Works Cited page. That's your last page that you include with your essay to cite the sources that you use. And it looks like this. And notice that there's a hanging indent. And that's the way that we format all Works Cited entries. And the way it works is that the first line is 1 inch in from the edge of the paper. So you have your typical 1 inch margin. And then the way that it wraps is with an indent of 5 spaces. And you can set this up in your word processor. So this is what an electronic source would look like on your Works Cited page. And the important thing to note is that you're not always going to have all of this information. So let's say there's no author. In that case, you would just go to the next piece, the title of the article. And you would rearrange your Works Cited to have that title come first. And the title would be the thing that you would cite in your parentheses. The first element in this citation is always the thing that you put in the parentheses in your paper. If there's no title, then you would go to the publication. If there's no publication responsible, then you would go to the institution. One thing to realize is if your source is this spare, you may want to reconsider whether it is a good source or not. Thank you for watching.